Hello, welcome to another Money Magic podcast episode. Today we're going to be talking about scapegoating and the trauma being scapegoated in our family of origin and how that impacts our financial behavior and gives birth to the not good enough wound. Right? So if you've just joined, my name is Vangile. I help women of color heal ancestral money trauma so they can fall in love with their bank accounts, increase income, and live their best lives. So today I'm recording from Chiang Mai, Thailand, from my bedroom on my bed because it has been raining for 7 days straight. Honestly, it's really intense. And also for today's episode, if you're watching the video and you see me glance down every so often, it's because I've made notes for today, right? I love it. I wanted to go really, really in depth on this topic, even though I talk about it in my next book, which is coming out October 2023. Yay! Right? So I talk a little about it, and I think it's such an important topic. So feeling not good enough is when we doubt ourselves all the time, right? And feel like we're just never measuring up. And it can be connected to being scapegoated within our family of origin, right? Scapegoating is when you are blamed and criticized for everything, even when it is not your fault. So everything that happens within the family, somehow it is your fault and it will become your fault, right? And it makes us feel like a target often, right? Because people don't deal with their problems. Instead, they take all those problems on, they put all those problems on you. So in this episode, we're going to unpack how scapegoating comes to be, like what happens within our families so that like a person becomes a scapegoat, right? And how do we deal with it? But also more importantly is how does it impact us? How does it show up in terms of our behaviors, our relationships, and our finances, right? So if you've been feeling like you're the black sheep of your family, or you're feeling like you really don't fit in anywhere, really stick around. This is going to help you a lot. But before we even dig deeper, I really want to explain that scapegoating doesn't just happen within our families of origin, right? It also happens in workplaces, it happens in schools. So if you were a child at school that was bullied by, say, the collective, that can also be scapegoating, where we see that a child, there's one particular person in a class or in a grade, or maybe several people in a class and a grade, who everyone takes their problems out on them. They criticize them for everything. Everything is deflected to them, right? We see it in adults all the time, right? Where a group of people will gang up against one person. You see it in the workplace often, where maybe you're in a work team and people will gang up against one person. So I want to acknowledge that and say, just because I'm talking about our families of origin doesn't mean that I'm not aware that scapegoating happens outside of the family as well. So for today, we're focusing mainly on our families and family of origin, and how family dynamics operate and how they then impact us as individuals and give rise to this not good enough, this feeling of not measuring up, this constant feeling of imposter syndrome, feeling like we don't belong, feeling rejected, right? And most of us don't even know why we have this deep fear of rejection, why we have this inability to rely on other people, why we feel scared to trust other people, right? So without further ado, let's talk about that, right? I think today's episode is going to be really eye-opening. So let's talk about how I started to, why I'm doing this particular episode today, right? Whew, okay, so For me, I've been doing a lot of inner work. So I have a course called the Money Magic course. This is what the Money Magic podcast is named after. So if you've noticed a lot of my previous podcast interviews, I've been interviewing a lot of my own clients and asking about their trauma, to share their money stories and to share how they have been healing their money stories using the online course. So, in episode 78, I spoke about how my name had been sent by a group of individuals that I thought were my friends to embassies around the world, to a lot of my favorite countries, right? And because I thought they were my friends, they knew a lot of my favorite countries, and they wrote that I was a tourism fraud. Right? So this gave rise as because I'm a nomad. So I've been spending most of my life, adult life, since 2005, I've been a nomad traveling the world. And it gave rise to all these fears whenever, now that I'm traveling again, especially when I got to Vietnam and Thailand, because those countries had been emailed to say I'm a tourism fraud. And it gave rise to this feeling of, oh my gosh, people are going to judge me. The countries are not going to let me in. The embassies are going to believe them and not me. And it just made me feel like I need to be perfect in everything, right? That the only way that I'm going to be able to be let into a country is if I am perfect. So I started getting a little bit of this obsession with being perfect. And what I know from my work is that perfectionism is just a symptom of an underlying cause, which is the not good enough wound. So me knowing the work that I do around trauma, I understood that the letters to the embassy and everything that I was going through with the immigration was cool, nothing crazy, right? But that those were just, it didn't start there, that there must be something even deeper, right? At least that's what I assumed, because one of my core wounds is the not good enough wound. So then I've started doing a lot of the not good enough wound work. And what has been coming up for me in the meditations, so I recorded a meditation. I've recorded meditations around the not good enough wound to help clients heal their not good enough wound. I use myself as a guinea pig for a lot of my work, and then I test it out on clients, and then I roll it out to the general public. But first I see how it impacts me and my finances when I do this work, right? So I started doing this not good enough wound meditation years and years ago. I recorded it, I think, in 2017 or 2016. So I keep coming back to the meditations because trauma is layered, and you can do the money magic meditations over and over and over again, right? So I started doing the not good enough wound meditations, which, if any of my clients are listening, that is lesson 18 of the Money Magic course, or lesson 19. Yeah, not too sure, but one of those two lessons. And what kept coming up for me as I was looking at this need to be perfect at immigration, right, was I started having this recurring memory in my meditations. Well, recurring memory, and then like multiple memories after that. It was like something just broke open. I'm in the car with my mom. I must be about 14. We're driving to Johannesburg. It's late. So if you don't know much about Johannesburg, so Johannesburg traffic is really, really crazy. Johannesburg, South Africa. So I was in high school at the time, and we needed to drive about 45 minutes for me to get to school. I was living in the south. My school was in the north. I was in a private school. And so we're driving to school, and the traffic is extremely wild. So if you're just watching and you see the lighting change, I'm playing around with my ring light. So then then everything just starts to shift in this memory. We're in this traffic, we're bumper to bumper, right? So bumper to bumper traffic means like, we're like this very little space between the cars. So we're driving along, and this was quite common. If we left even like 15 minutes late, you'd end up in this kind of traffic. So This day, though, my mom ends up, she's indicating she's trying to get into another lane because that lane is moving faster. I'm reading, she's indicating, and in the middle of indicating, she doesn't see the car in front of her has braked because she's focused on getting into the next lane, and she bumps into that car. Wow. So everything happens, insurance things are swapped, all that. And this is the time when my mom also doesn't have a job. She's quit her job, her money is running out, so it's a very stressful situation. But the thing that really, really trips me up is how my mother then, she drops me off at school, but when she picks me up from school, she is now shouting and screaming. She starts shouting and screaming at me and blaming me for the accident. True story, right? So she says that the fact that she bumped into the car is my fault. And I'm like, how's this my fault? And she's like, you shouldn't have been reading in the car. You should have been, your job when I'm driving is to look at other cars and help me drive. I would be a better driver if you didn't drive. If you didn't read in the car and you actually focused on helping me drive. So for months on end, I get shouted at every single day for this car accident. Every day. I'm screamed at, I'm yelled at, I'm told that I'm terrible, I'm a terrible person because I caused this car accident. So even though I wasn't driving, it was my fault. So this is just, so I start seeing all these memories in the Not Good Enough meditation where many things like this happened within my family, where when things went wrong, I was often somehow blamed, even if I wasn't there. It's somehow my fault, especially with my mother, right? For example, my mom would tell us that the reason why she and my dad are not together with my sister, she would tell my sister and I, is because of you guys. It's your fault, right? Because I had to choose between you and him, and I chose you guys. So it's like all these things, and it wasn't just my mom, it was many family members. So over time, I started to see this. By the time I was 13, I was like, no more. That's how I got myself into therapy, right? Because I was like, how, as a little child, am I responsible for people's relationships breaking up, for all sorts of things? So even though I was already in therapy when the car accident happened, but it was kind of crazy. So many things went down. So this is just an example of how scapegoating happens, right? It's like you're a child, and from a young age in a family, like everyone kind of blames you. You are the problem. You are the reason why bad things happen, right? So let's take a look at how scapegoating comes to be, right? The psychological roots and the impact on family relationships, and explore the psychological aspects and how it impacts us, right? So, just gonna take a breather. If you're watching this, I'm drinking some tea. Okay. So, how does this slowly progress over time that one person or even two people in the family become scapegoats, right? The psychological aspects of it, right? So one of the first things is projection, right? Is how you create a scapegoat in the family is that you focus all the blame and all the criticism on this one person, right? So a huge part of that is that the family members haven't learned how to own their own shortcomings. They haven't learned how to own their own issues. So instead of facing their own issues and their own shortcomings, it's almost like you take those out of you and then you project them onto another person, and then you just put them there and say, there, everything that I don't like about myself, that is the problem. That is all you, right? So instead of facing your own drama, you go, instead of facing their own drama or your own drama, they just go, there. The reason why I have this drama is because of you. So It's an inability to sit with yourself and to look at yourself. Listen, none of us is perfect. We all have shortcomings, right? But more often than not, most people will look at their shadow sides, and instead of sitting with it, they will blame another person for everything. So this happens a lot within families, right? And then just the other thing is the scapegoat from a very young age will often be labeled as a troublemaker, right? And what often happens is that every other family member sees them as a troublemaker. Sorry, I'm really playing around with this. If you're watching this, you'll notice that I'm really playing around with the lighting here because I'm not sure how it's working out. So just excuse me as I go through all of this and fix it again and just trust that like the lighting is fine, right? So you have one person that, because of all this projection, right? So maybe one family member projects all their drama on this little child, right? And says, so for example, you see it often at times, right? You have a dad that will say, oh, if you were not born, a mom or a dad that will say to a child, I gave up my dreams for you, right? And then they project their loss of dreams and inability to go after their dreams onto their child. And because they don't want to face the fact that maybe they didn't have the resilience, that they didn't know how to do certain things. They don't want to face their shortcomings, right? And so with that, over time, you start to label that person as something, right? Either a troublemaker or a burden or whatever, right? So in the case of, say, the father that believes that they gave up their dreams for the family or for the child, they may label the child as a burden and continue to behave as such, right? So that they'll literally show up in that manner. Like if a child is asking for anything, oh, this child is such a burden. You're always asking for things, right? Or most of us are labeled as troublemakers, right? And we can see this even outside of our family of origin, right? So you're labeled as a troublemaker, and then and then you just kind of start playing into that role. Not because you are a troublemaker or because you are a burden, but everybody else in the family starts to play into that role and treat you as a troublemaker or as a burden, right? And this happens a lot in families with a lot of trauma and adults who do not know how to process their trauma, right? The important thing to understand is that families develop specific roles for each member, and the scapegoat emerges as one person, right? So the scapegoat is just one of many roles within the family. Within a family, you'll have the person that is seen as, oh, you're just wonderful, right? Even though you're like, but this person is such a dickhead, right? But like, it will just stick. This is how, I don't want to say this is how it is, but this is a lot of times with trauma, this is how we try to make sense of the world within families. This is why it's so important to heal, right? And then also emotional regulation. So let's talk about, or what I would rather say, let me rephrase that as emotional dysregulation. I'll explain why I'm using both these terms, right? So a lot of times is that how a scapegoat also comes to be, the projection, the reason behind the projection and the role of the scapegoat, how the scapegoat even gets this role, is because the majority of the family members do not know how to emotionally regulate, right? So there's so much emotional dysregulation within the family that the only way for them to regulate their emotions and to cope with life is by literally making someone else the scapegoat for all their self-criticism, self-blame, self-anger, right? So because they don't know how to process it, they have to take it out and literally beat up another person as their way of processing, right? And also you're just being used as, if you're a scapegoat in the family, you're just being used as a stress ball. I'm sorry to say this, right? It's that because they don't know how to sit with uncomfortable emotions, how to regulate themselves emotionally, they use you as the stress ball. So, like, beating up on you, shouting on you makes them feel better. It's the way that they handle things. So, in the example of the car, right? My mother felt better about the accident by just, in her stressful condition, by not saying like, oh, I just made things worse for myself and I'm in this financial crisis, by just blaming me, right? So I mean, I've done so much work on this, I don't really get angry anymore. So if you see me smiling or laughing about it, it's because, firstly, it's my way of coping, right? But also, I've done a lot of work on it. I cry about it often in meditation. So it's not like I'm like blasé about it. I've spent the last few months crying about this because it feels, trauma is very layered. Like, I work through these memories so often, but then something will happen to trigger these memories again, and I'll be right back there, and then I'll work over through the next layer and then the next layer, right? So yeah, what else? So for me, what I saw also is like, I remember this one time my uncle really like slapping the crap out of me in a cab, and the cab driver having to get involved and ask him to get off of me. And at the time I was like 15, right? And he was like also scapegoating me for something else, and screaming that he will make my life a living misery, and he's got the ability to do that. And when I think of those moments, I realize that all it was I was just, in those moments, I was just a tool for really dysregulated adults to get their stress out and to basically make themselves feel better. It is not right, not even close. In fact, it is pretty much fucked up, right? But this is why I am so much in favor of us healing, so that we break the cycle. Because the sad thing is that when we learned that this is what we learned from such families, is that the way that we deal with stress is to scapegoat another person, or to get violent, even physically, with another person, right? That's how we do it. So unfortunately, that's how a lot of adults still cope. They'll do that with their friends, they'll do that in workplaces, instead of just like dealing with their emotions and taking responsibility. And then this brings, so if we're talking about responsibility, let's also talk about power and control. So yes, we spoke about emotional regulation, so, and projection, right? And all the other and other factors. But what other reason would a family have to make a person a scapegoat? One of the reasons is about power and control, right? One of the things, another definition for trauma is an event or an experience that leaves us feeling powerless. So in most families, there's so many things that have happened to family members, the adults in the family members, that might have left them feeling powerless and completely out of control, right? Maybe they grew up with parents as well that were extremely abusive. Like, I know for a fact that my maternal grandmother, bless her heart, was incredible, right? My maternal grandfather, however, had a lot of emotional issues and was extremely violent and abusive, right? So what he did to his kids was wild in terms of abuse, right? My mom included. They don't see that though. When they talk of my grandfather, they list an angel and they laugh about the beatings and the abuse and they think it's funny. And I'm just like out here being like, oh, this man sounds so hectic. It is so scary. But anyway, yeah, so growing up in that environment as a child with such an abusive parental figure can leave you feeling powerless, where everything you did had to be perfect and you were constantly watched with a hawk's eye view, right? So now, as an adult in the family, how are you going to take back power and control, right? It's to make sure that someone else feels disempowered, right? This is a tale as old as time. So if you think about racial dynamics where Black people are often blamed for so much in the world, right? Where we have been made to be so evil throughout history. We're just scapegoats for the rest of the world, right? So that is a trauma. That's how like people maintain power. That's how other races, especially the West, maintains power and control. It makes them feel powerful and in control because they can say, oh, all our problems or we don't have crime, we're super happy, we're not depressed or whatever, and just talk about other things, and then just have like one part of the world like Africa and say everything bad is coming from that continent. That's a form of scapegoating, right? And it makes you feel powerful, it makes you feel in control. And whenever bad things happen, like I'm thinking of in particular COVID, where like they'd be reporting the news and they'd be like, oh yeah, but like here are the COVID stats, but it's going to be really, really bad on the African continent. So it's not focusing really on your issues. It's like your issues are always juxtaposed against this other nation, even though they have nothing to do with your issues at all. You see it all the time. I mean, Hitler did it with in the Holocaust, right, with the Jewish community. So we do it as humans in a way to seize power and seize control. It's a tale as old as time, right? Dictators do it all the time, give people a scapegoat, right, in order to get voted and then rule a nation. So in the same way, in a family, this is what happens. Usually it does come from intergenerational trauma as well. I'm not going to talk on this podcast about intergenerational trauma that leads to the macrocosm of racism and scapegoating different races, right? But within our families, we can often see how family members may feel out of control. But I do want to touch on this one thing because I think it's really, really important when it comes to gender and to race, right? What we may often see is that with people that have been oppressed throughout time, right? Especially with women or with Black people. What we don't talk about is how racial trauma, gender trauma, and then the intersection of both, and even sexuality, right? If you're gay, lesbian, queer, transgender, all that, how that leads to trauma and can leave us feeling like we have no power in the world because so much of the world creates laws to make us feel powerless, right? So if you think of what's happening right now with gay rights, most people not being able or fighting for the right to be able to get married and all that has such a huge impact on your sense of power and your sense of destiny as a human being, right? So now take a country like South Africa, where you've been working, where you've had years and years of, centuries of colonization, slavery, apartheid, right? And everyone has been going through that. And now family members, if they haven't done their work, go through this world feeling extremely powerless, right? Because externally, you are disempowered. Even though you were highly educated, you're not seen, you're invisibilized, you're disempowered. How do you get back power and control? Often it's by scapegoating another person, right? And the irony of it is that we tend not to scapegoat the people that are causing that trauma, because it's almost like, it's the government, it's so vague. But it's easier to come home, say that you're a man, you're not earning enough, the system has beaten you down. You come home and you have all these kids that you have to look after, and to just scapegoat them as bad or a burden, right? And so that may be your way of, and then like pushing them down may be a way of feeling in control and powerful. Again, this podcast episode is not me justifying scapegoating. I hope you guys understand, right? But I'm explaining why certain, like how macro events impact us on a micro level, how they then play out within our family dynamics. And again, I want to state that being scapegoated as someone who has been, it's completely fucked up. So not making excuses for family members that have done that, right? So scapegoating, making someone else feel small and blaming them for everything, may actually be a way that family members that feel, especially the adults in the family, that feel out of control and feel powerless, start to regain their power and start to regain a sense of control. And this is why the cycle of scapegoating may continue within families. And then just low self-esteem, right? So guys, like, let's be honest, if our families haven't done their inner work, and for me, I can see how in my family, again, growing up in a country like apartheid South Africa, growing up with a history of colonization, all that, and where apartheid worked so hard to let us know that you're not good enough, you're not enough. Where it was literally programmed, and our parents had to write that down, that if you're black, you're not as good as a white person. Like, really memorizing that kind of stuff can really impact your self-esteem as a person. Not really, that's the point of why you were taught this. That was the point of Bantu education, right? Was to make you feel less than and to lead to self-esteem. So when I look at it, I can see how my mom got to the point where she was like, well, I don't want to have to deal with my own issues, because if she had to work on her own not good enough issues and her own self-esteem, can you imagine? She'd have to face the fact that she was projecting. She would have to deal with all her own stuff and her dad's stuff, right? So what often happens is that families that have where family members have very low self-esteem, they will tend to deal with life and to preserve whatever self-esteem they have by creating a scapegoat within the family. Because, hey, if I have low self-esteem, do I want to feel even more crappy by acknowledging my mistakes? No. So it's better if nothing is ever my fault, right? So then we just create a scapegoat within the family. Another reason, guys, why we need to heal for ourselves, so that we don't become parents that never ever take responsibility, that never ever apologize, never ever say that they're wrong, because that impacts children and it leads to intergenerational trauma, right? And our children internalize these messages, right? Just like we internalize the messages that we are not good enough, and there's the danger that it just continues for future generations. And of course, just having like history of depression, right, has a huge impact on us. So let's say that we have mental health issues that have been misdiagnosed or undiagnosed within a family. So dealing with family members that have undiagnosed mental health issues, that like anxiety and depression. It could also, like, some of them, they may not exactly go straight into scapegoating you, but it's easier to get those family members it may be easier to get some of those family members to become part of the crowd that then scapegoats one individual. I don't want to say it's easier, but it can be one of those things. And I would like to say that I really do think that some undiagnosed issues are probably one of the reasons why some of this trauma happens, right? If you're struggling with anxiety as a parent, for example, and you don't have the tools to deal with your anxiety, right? Again, this is not me. I'm going to keep saying this, right? This is not me okaying scapegoating, but I want you guys to understand how some of these things play out. So maybe you're struggling with anxiety, a parent is struggling with anxiety, right? So because they don't have the tools to deal with the anxiety, one of the things that they may do is they may deal with their panic, their anger, their anxiety by scapegoating their child, right? And other family members may do the same, which is why it's so important to really shine a light on certain things, right? To say, I am struggling with anxiety, and then to find ways to heal that. I am struggling with, I don't know, certain mental health issues, and to just start healing that. Because what sometimes happens is that when we don't have the tools, we just reach to the behavioral patterns that we know from our past, and we look, our inner child and our inner teen hijacks us, and they start behaving in the same way that our parents did, and they just repeat the cycle. Whew. Okay, so let's look at what do relationships look like for the family members that scapegoat, right? Oh, sorry, that's a wrong thing. So I wanted to talk more about, so how does the trauma of being scapegoated impact us financially? Whew. Okay, so I think when we have grown up in an environment where we have been scapegoated, as you can imagine, if you are the person that's taking all the blame, the criticism, self-deprecation, everything, you're being blamed for everything basically, it's hard to feel confident, right? So you're going to have a lot of self-doubt and confidence as well, confidence issues. And for me, I kind of get annoyed at times when people are like, you just need to build your confidence. Well, guess what? It took me years to build this level of confidence, right? And I used to think there's something wrong with me, because people would be like, you just have to be confident. But you can't just wake up and snap your fingers like that and become confident if you have spent decades being told that there's something wrong with you, right? Or maybe the first 17 years of my life being told that something is wrong with you, and being told that you're not good enough, you're being blamed for everything, all these things, right? You internalize a lot of that. So it makes sense that you will have a lot of self-doubt, you'll have a lot of confidence issues. And how this will impact your finances is that for us often to increase our income, we have to have a level of self-confidence, right? So if I'm going to go after a high-paying job, I need to believe in myself, right? I have to have a level of self-belief that I can do certain things. So if I have like high levels of self-doubt, low confidence, I'm less likely to take advantage of career opportunities, less likely to take advantage of business opportunities, right? It's going to make it very hard for me to step up and be in the ring and be seen and make bold decisions and take risks, right? And the other thing is, it's going to impact our ability to make decisions. We're going to find it very, very hard to make decisions. Drinking more water. Oh, sorry, more tea. Okay, we're going to have a hard time making decisions, right? And a huge part of that is because we have this history of being blamed for everything that goes wrong. Now, get this, if you make a decision and it goes horribly wrong, you're going to be scared that, oh my gosh, you're still going to have that trauma of being blamed and criticized and being called all sorts of names, right? So it leads to indecisiveness. And I saw that in myself for the longest while, because if I would make a bad decision, I would criticize myself for months on end. And I still struggle with that. I have to do so much work when things don't go well in my life, right? Business and otherwise, I do a lot of inner work. The difference though is that I have the tools and I know what is happening. And this is like the majority of the work that I do. This is my work, right? This is what I do with clients as well. So I do a lot of this work on myself. So most people are like, oh, you make decisions quickly. No, I've just had the tools, and I was not always like this, right? I had to work through that and work with my inner child, work with my inner teen, work on releasing my vows of loyalty, work on my not good enough wound, right? And I still do that every time I make a bad decision or things go bad, or like, for example, the property magician stock fell and everything that has happened with wealthy money. I've had to do a lot of work on that so that I can keep making decisions and remind myself that it's right. It's okay if the decisions are wrong, right? Because that's part of entrepreneurship. Not every decision is going to be perfect. But when we carry this trauma, it can feel like making a decision is life or death. Right? Because literally our sense of survival it may feel like our sense of survival depends on us making the right decision because we were blamed for everything that went wrong. So we know the impacts of what happens when you make a wrong move. And that has a huge impact on your finances, right? So when you stay, and this is also why I work with so many coaches, right? Why I have the support that I have, because when I found that when I have support and I have someone mirroring back what it is that I am doing, and they can help me see, oh wait, this is just normal. Like, it's all, just make the decision. If it goes wrong, it goes wrong. I can make decisions faster. Before I had that level of support, I would stay with one decision. If I had to make a financial decision, do I launch this product? Don't I? Am I going to start marketing this product and services? Am I going to price this product and service? Or what am I going to price this product at? How am I going to market it at? It would take me months to make a decision. And in those months, I'm losing money, right? So now I just make decisions so quickly. And if it doesn't work out, I'm able to come back, do the work, and make another decision. And the truth is that the more decisions I'm making, the more momentum I'm building, the more lessons I'm learning, and the quicker I'm getting the financial results that I desire. And then, of course, we're more likely to be risk averse if we've been scapegoated within our families. I mean, guys, that makes sense, right? Because I just talked about the indecision. So you're not going to take huge risks if you know that, like, you can fail, and that you associate failure with survival and life and death and being criticized, screamed at, all that, right? So people that definitely grew up with family members that tolerated failure, or school systems that encourage failure, probably have a higher tolerance for risk, right? Because they don't blame themselves as much for things going wrong. And here's the thing about money and investing and growing income and creating extra streams of income, is that the more money, if you want to make more money, you have to be willing to take on risk. In finance, you learn about the risk reward theory, right? Which is this theory that the more risk you take on, the higher your return on investment. So part of why certain investments yield a high risk is because a high rate of return is because they are so risky, right? So, but you have to be, and it's okay if you're risk averse, but the truth is, for growth to happen, you have to be willing to take some kind of risk. Especially if you're going to be an entrepreneur, you're going to have to take some kind of risk. And already entrepreneurship is extremely risky. So you may be like carrying your dreams within you and unable to execute and wondering, why am I so scared to even take the first step? You've grown up in a family where you've been scapegoated, right? Or maybe you have experience of being bullied at school where you've been scapegoated. You will feel really scared of that, right? You will feel really scared of making that leap, starting the business, or you might find yourself taking at the lowest risk possible and not wanting to risk much, right? Yeah. And then the other thing, how it shows up in our finances and in our businesses, is we'll have an inability to trust employees, partners, or investors, right? So if we've been scapegoated, what have we learned about humans, right? Without knowing it, our family was teaching us that human beings are not safe. Being in relationship with humans is not safe because they will blame you for everything. They will make you feel like if you are not perfect, they will blame you for your imperfections. So for a lot of us, what will often happen is that we will feel safer by isolating, right? Not having a lot of humans around us, because then it's safer than having to deal with the criticism and the blame. And maybe in relationships, we're waiting for the other shoe to drop, right? To be like, whew, what are people going to do? So instead, what we do, and the other thing is that we may be scared that if we do something wrong, the people closest to us, because this is what we were taught about love, that the people closest to us will blame us and criticize us. So to protect ourselves from that blame and that criticism and that rejection and even sometimes the abuse, what we may do is we may actually hide, right? And isolate ourselves, right? And I think this is really, really huge, because I think that this is how most of us deal with life. It's something that I had to work on so much, right? You might find yourself just being a loner. For me, it played out a lot in romantic relationships, just the inability to trust someone to be in a romantic relationship with me, because I was like, oh my God, they'll use my vulnerabilities against me, right? They'll use everything that I taught them against me. So when this happens and we're trying to grow our income, it really is counterintuitive, because it feels like, yes, I'm safe if I do everything myself. I can't trust others because people are not safe. I can't trust others to help me on my money-making journey because humans are not safe. So what do we do instead? So we try to do it alone. We become the strong Black woman archetype, right? We become superwomen and we try to do it ourselves, or we become Superman. But here's the thing, for us to scale and grow, we need support, we need help, and we need people. We need to trust some people. We need people to show us ourselves, to see us, right? And we need to, and I think also the big thing with this is we also need to see that other people are human, but not everyone is our family. So with me, I used to be so scared to get close to humans, because I was like, oh, they're going to turn on me, blame me for everything, shout at me, scream at me, all of those things. And listen, all of those things have happened to me in childhood with friends and all that. Like childhood, as an adult, they happen. But I think what I've also learned is that it doesn't mean that every human being is like that, right? And the truth is, I still need humans to keep growing and scaling and making more money. I still need support to be able to grow my streams of income. So at some point, we do need to heal this not good enough wound, right? But we need to heal this feeling of being scapegoated. And what I found is that when you work more on healing your not good enough wound and start trusting yourself, it becomes a little easier to start trusting other people, right? Again, this is a journey. It didn't happen overnight. It's been trial and error, but every time what I've seen is that I've had to do a lot of work also on my vows of invisibility, because the way that I felt safe was to invisibilize myself and not share my vulnerabilities, because people are not safe and those vulnerabilities can be used against me, right? That was my belief. But every time I've had to make the decision to heal that vow of invisibility and make the decision as I'm healing that vow of invisibility to keep being vulnerable and to keep showing up. So certain things require choice from us, and it's hella hard, right? But I found that as you're healing and you're releasing those fears, it becomes easier to make certain choices. And of course, we have a hard time coping with failure. Of course, because we were never taught how to cope with failure. So if you've got the trauma of if you've been scapegoated within your family of origin, you may find that it's really, really difficult for you to cope with failure. And here's the thing, if you want to grow within your business, you need to know how to cope with failure. If you want to grow as an entrepreneur, if you want to grow as an investor, you need to understand that failure is part of life, that you are going to make bad decisions. It's just part of the entrepreneurial journey, part of the investing journey. It is part of income growth, right? I keep remembering, I don't know if it was last year, maybe last year or 2021. I want to say 2022, where I was on a panel and I was talking, and Wendy Luhabe was also on the same panel. So if you don't know, Wendy Luhabe is one of the wealthiest Black women in South Africa. And one of the things that she said is that for you to make a lot of money, you have to get very comfortable with losing a lot of money. You have to get very comfortable with failure. And I'll never forget that, right? Because it's one of the things that I've had to work on, right? So what we've been taught when we have been the scapegoats in our families is that failure is the worst thing in the world, right? It is terrible. So nobody really teaches us how to deal with failure. I mean, just in everyday life, we are not taught how to deal with failure. How much more damaging is it to be in a family where if you fail, it is used as proof that you are indeed not good enough, or that you are indeed flawed, or that you are indeed problematic, right? Where every shortcoming, every failure, every imperfection is proof for other family members that there's something wrong with you, and then it then impacts you, right? And kind of like impacts your view of self, right? So that can be really scary. So failing can be something that you associate with this trauma of being scapegoated, and it can lead to self-blame and discouragement, and it makes it so much easier for us to give up fast when we reach a financial snag, because every financial failure, every financial snag is proof that our family is right, and it just triggers the inner child that is traumatized, or the inner teen that is traumatized, right? So I remember this one experience when I started my first company, Speak to Be Free. I was sitting on the steps in Boston, Massachusetts. I was sitting on the steps at the Boston Library. I call my sister and I'm crying. And the company is not doing well, right? It's my first registered company. I've just graduated from the MBA program. And I'm just like to my sister, I am a failure. I am horrible. I'm the worst human on the planet. I will never succeed. Everyone in the family was right. I'm just going to keep failing. I will never be successful. Everyone was right. I am cursed. I am this horrible thing. Saying all the worst things about myself, right? And my sister starts crying on the other end. So Honey starts crying and she goes, how can you say these things about yourself? Can't you see yourself? Like, would you ever tell someone that you love that? Would you ever tell me that? And I'm thinking, no. And she's like, well, if you wouldn't tell me these things just because I'm failing in my business, why are you telling yourself that? And I remember it just stopped me cold. And years later, I realized that that's because that's what I had been taught that's what I'd been told whenever I had any kind of failure in my life, right? So the way that I parented myself as an adult and parented my inner child and my inner teen was to tell them that. So every single failure in the business felt like life and death, and kind of reinforced this belief about me, and it made it hard for me to keep taking action and just keep showing up in the business. And so by the time I closed my business, luckily I'd already started on this healing journey and was doing the healing work. But the year before I started the healing work and then made the decision to close the business, I was filled with so much shame. And I think part of why I even kept the business going for so long and refused to shut it down was because I was trying to prove a point, and because I was so scared that if I shut down the business, it would be proof that I had failed, right? And that I was a failure. But as I started to do the work, it gave me the permission to shut down the business, to close it down. Guess what? This is how Wealthy Money was born. It is from that experience that Heart, Mind, and Money was written, right? Because it gave me permission to just go on my healing journey. So, and of course, with that, the other way that it impacts that's being scapegoated impacts our financial behavior is that it makes it hard for us to handle criticism, right? Here's the thing. If you are on a journey of expansion, or you are an entrepreneur, or just someone who is in the public eye, you are going to receive feedback, unsolicited and solicited feedback, right? And criticism, right? It is inevitable. People are going to judge you for the way you speak. I've been judged for my videos. I've been judged for all sorts of things. So the interesting thing is, when I started Speak to Be Free, before I went on my healing journey and started to do a lot of my work around the not good enough wound, is that I couldn't handle criticism. Right? Like every criticism in my first company, Speak to Be Free, broke me down. But I'm very, very glad for that. And it wasn't as public, right? Whereas with Wealthy Money, like I'll get people writing me long emails about what is wrong with me, right? I'll get people like just doing so much, and it will be, what? How? I laugh now because I've learned that some criticism is obviously more personal than other criticism. Some criticism levels me and breaks me. But the point is that I have the tools. And when I didn't have the tools, and I was still, and I didn't understand this trauma of scapegoating and understand how I'd been parented and how that was affecting my ability to show up in my business and show up financially, I would completely think that there was something wrong with me. Like, why don't you have a thick skin? Oh my gosh, just brush it off. Just tell yourself that you don't care. What is wrong with you, right? But now I understand that criticism can trigger that child and that teen that spent most of their years being scapegoated, right? And it can trigger the same emotional response, right? Which is sometimes the emotional response to hide. And in my case, my emotional response to be perfect. So I always wanted to be perfect because I was rebelling, right? So I had two ways of rebelling. Was to, F you, I'll show you, I'm so perfect, I'm so great, and everybody loves me. That was one way of rebelling, to try and prove that, which was obviously never working because I was a bullied child. Or my other way was to just fight everyone and to just say F you and just fight and to run away from home, right? So not being able to handle criticism makes it hard for us to keep showing up, right? And this is such an important part of really growing our income, is that we need to be persistent. We need to keep showing up. We need to show up even when we're not everybody's darling, right? So that's really, really important, so that consistency in growing what it is that you're growing in your business. And of course, as I've mentioned all that, it's that if we've been the scapegoat in our family, it also gives rise to a low level. It also makes us unable, how do I put this? Okay, it just leads to a low level of resilience, right? It makes it hard for us to have grit. So I don't know if you guys have read the book Grit. I like it, right? So scapegoating experiences often undermine our resilience and our ability to bounce back from setbacks, right? I mean, guys, if you've been told from a really young age as a child that something's wrong with you, it's going to be hard to believe that you can make things happen. And without that belief that I can do this, it can make it hard for you to keep going and to keep showing up. And resilience is such an important part of the entrepreneurial journey, of the investing journey, of the money journey in general, right? And for me, I saw how this played out in terms of my finances, because I had such low resilience. Whenever I could not, whenever I would go off budget, I wouldn't be able to get back on track, right? Especially when I was still doing budgets, income less expenses type budget. And I wasn't doing the work that I'm doing now around money and how I budget now using the bank account challenge. I would go a little crazy, right? And I would not be able to get back on the budget. If I went off budget and off track, I would completely continue going off track because I just believed, well, I'm a failure. This just proves my family right. My mother has been right this whole time. So why even bother? So can you see that, like, I had very little resilience. And so as a result, didn't have the ability to keep persisting. And it impacted my financial behavior. It impacted my spending habits. It impacted even the way that I was making money. And then my final point of how being scapegoated impacts our financial behavior is to talk about how it makes us scared to step into our role as leaders, right? If you've been scapegoated, you may feel some type of way about being visible and being seen as a leader, right? Mainly because you have trust issues. You have seen maybe the worst in humans from a very young age. You've seen how people treat other human beings. You've seen how people respond when things go bad. So you know that you don't want to be a target. And in order to keep yourself safe and to protect yourself, you may decide not to step into leadership positions. As you can imagine, this can impact your finances. So may make it hard. You may self-sabotage and stop yourself from getting promoted at work. You may self-sabotage and stop yourself from being visible and being seen in your industry. If you're an entrepreneur, if you are, say, someone whose progress depends on visibility, you may refuse to be seen in that space, right? As a leader, because you may be scared that people may turn on you. And listen, we live in a world where we have seen how celebrities are built up over time only to be torn down. So most of us have seen how people burst out with glee when someone has flaws and is imperfect. And so we may be super, super scared that that will happen to us. And chances are, at some point, every leader kind of goes through that, right? So and this is where the work comes in. This is where the inner work comes in, because it's not about the events and people, right? It's about how we respond to those events, especially when you're dealing with a mix of humans. I remember recently one of my coaches told me about this theory. I don't know what it is, what the name of this theory or law is, but it's kind of like, I think it's maybe the law of polarity. I don't know. Do not quote me on this. But it's this idea that she was telling me when I was going through my public shaming incident. She was like, Van, can you believe, what would it feel like to understand and to accept that, like, in this world, at some point, 50%, all of us have this way of living through life where 50% of people love you and 50% of people cannot stand you or are indifferent to you or don't care about you, right? And the other 50% love you. And what if I told you that for most people on this planet, it is the same? And then one of my other coaches said to me, even God goes through that, And she was like, why do you think that people should like you when most of the world doesn't even like God? They argue about the existence of the divine or anything greater, So who are you? Why should you be any special and why should you be exempt? Well, she didn't say it that way. She was so kind and gentle about it, But when I sat down, I was like, this is very, very fascinating. But so the work isn't being like, oh, I'm going to be the greatest and the most perfect person so that everybody loves me, right? It's about how can I hold the duality of both the love and the dislike or the indifference in my body as I become more visible and as I step into my power, right? And I know that's really, really scary. How can I give people permission to have their emotions and to feel the way that they feel? I feel like the last few months that has been one of the hardest lessons, right? Which is what my coaches would say, what would it feel like not to defend yourself? Not to try and influence how people see you, but to just focus on you and how you show up. One of the hardest things I can tell you, especially when you have a history of being scapegoated, because as a scapegoat, everybody else formed an identity around you, and they literally created the identity of you as this problem child, or the black sheep of the family, or the burden, or all of these things, right? So unfortunately, as an adult, and as you step in more into the role of leader, or as you step more into your role of expansion, you have to heal that so that you can give the world permission to see you as whatever, because now it's just going to be on a bigger scale. Not fun, right? Whew. Okay. So let's talk about some of the things that may lead. So I wanted to talk about how scapegoating impacts, how scapegoating links to the not good enough wound. I think I've kind of explained it in depth, right? But what is it, the link between the not good enough wound and scapegoating, which I've already shown how scapegoating gives rise to the not good enough wound, right? So often with parents, especially in family dynamics, I wanted to talk about some things that I may have missed, right? So why is it that scapegoating continues, and that we then internalize this and take on this not good enough wound, right? And then it forms and festers. And why is it that like it goes unnoticed so often for most of us, and we don't even see it as a trauma, right? I think a lot of that is that with parents, it can be that we have parents set unrealistic expectations for children, right? So it becomes justified. So why is it that scapegoating flies under the radar and we may not even see it? Is that our parents may set unrealistic expectations for us as children, right? So for example, no one in my family stepped up and said, this is an unrealistic expectation to expect a 14-year-old to help you with driving a car, to know that they should look this way, look that way, and to act as a co-driver in the car in the morning, right? So unrealistic expectations for children. So some things is like, maybe a child is born, let's say that parents are having fights all the time, like, and they decide, I'm going to have a child, and this child is going to be what bonds us together. And then the opposite happens, because parenting is so challenging and the child doesn't bond you together, and somehow that was an unrealistic expectation, to expect a baby to bond you together. And then obviously sometimes the parents may turn on the child, right? So instead of looking at their internal issues as a couple, they then turn on the child, right? And look at and blame this child for the issue. The unrealistic expectation in that case was expecting a baby to mend family problems and mend trauma, right? So when we fail to meet the family's expectations, we may be blamed as problematic, regardless of the actual reasons for that. And so what we then do is we internalize that, and then we start setting unrealistic expectations for ourselves, even as adults. And when we fail to meet those expectations, we then blame ourselves for that failure, and we parent ourselves in the same way that our parents parented us, because that's how they scapegoated us, right? To make us feel bad. But that's how we learn to parent ourselves. So when I started out in business, I would set insane expectations for myself, right? And it felt okay, like I remember before I started the bank account challenge work, I was $60,000 in debt, and I would write, pay off $60,000 in debt in 1 year, right? Because I would be reading all these marvelous stories. I'd read all these law of attraction books where people had written their affirmations, visualized, done everything just right, and they had managed to pay off debt. And then I would affirm and visualize and do all that, and things would not happen, right? And I would think, oh my God, something is wrong with me. And it would reinforce that belief from my family. So part of the things that I had to heal for myself was to work with my inner child so that we no longer set crazy expectations, unrealistic expectations, right? And set myself up for failure, right? And of course, another thing is that we don't even realize it as children, right? And then later on as adults. So why does another reason that scapegoating flies under the radar is that the parent may just have, or the family members just have dysfunctional communication patterns. So what we may see is maybe everyone in the family is constantly fighting, right? And what's happening is we're not even aware that the fighting pattern is not the same when it comes to us. That when they fight each other, it's about something else. But when everybody comes at us, it's to scapegoat us, right? So one way to be aware that we've been scapegoated is to start noticing when we've been blamed for things that are not our fault. And obviously consistently, not this thing of like, you've been blamed for something, it's not your fault, but it's a mistake. That's also traumatic, right? But this is like continuous criticizing, invalidating, right? It all contributes to scapegoating. And we may miss it in families that have dysfunctional communication patterns. And also another thing when we've been why scapegoating can fly under the radar and we're not even aware of it is parental favoritism, where you have a group of, say, cousins and siblings, and people in the family just choose one person as the favorite or several people as the favorite, and maybe you are the unlucky one that is not the favorite. So the favorites are being excused for everything, and you, on the other hand, are blamed for everything, even if it's the fault of the favorites, so that the favorites are always seen as perfect and you are not. On the surface, we don't see that as scapegoating at times, right? So yeah, I hope that helps. So let's go just a little deeper and look at what can you do if you have been scapegoated, right? What are some coping mechanisms that you can adopt in your family if you have been scapegoated? Just drinking my water. The first thing is set boundaries. So I'm going to share things that I've had to do over time, right? Oh, this is a huge one, especially if you carry the not good enough wound, right? Because scapegoating can give rise to the not good enough wound. It can also give rise to the vow of rebellion. That's a story for another day. If you guys want, I can go more deeply into scapegoating and the vow of rebellion. You can let me know in the comment section if you're watching on YouTube, or send me emails. Just let me know if that's something that you want. But for now, I'm not really fully focused on that, maybe a little later. Okay, so the first thing is to set boundaries with your family. Remember, most people tend to treat us, even as adults, the way that they treated us as children. So to them, we assume families, like I said before, families have a role. So the unfortunate thing with most families and most roles in families, if families don't do their inner work and heal their trauma, is that people get pigeonholed into a particular role. Have you ever just gone to a family and to a family meeting and you're like, and everybody's like, oh, but you're this person, and you're like, but I've not been this person in forever, and I was never that person, and you're grown up, but everybody just starts treating you as if you're the same person you were in childhood. That's because we just assume a role in a family, and we all kind of like go with that role. And this is a role that is taken for granted. And if you grew up in a family where you were scapegoated, as an adult even, chances are you will continue to be scapegoated. So set boundaries, choose how you want people to communicate with you, how you want to communicate with people, right? When you want to go home, when you want to see people, all of that. So I'll share my story, right? So for me, luckily for me, a lot of it was done. So was done by my mother. So my mother, because she was also a scapegoat in her family, so she was scapegoating me, but she'd been a scapegoat in her family. All her siblings see her as the worst person and as a monster, all that. So I think that she could only parent us in the same, well, parent me in particular in much the same way, right? So when I went to university, she left her family of origin, stopped talking to them, and just set the boundaries. So that meant with my maternal family, I already had that boundary set by my mother, because she was like, nope, I'm cutting ties with you guys, and so are my kids. So that kind of made it a bit easier. But then I had to learn to set boundaries with my mother, and it's been a long process. My relationship with my mom has been one of the most intense relationships, because I mean, we have gone through it, hey? So you can imagine going through this to the point where she's gifted me land this year, all sorts of things, where she has been the biggest supporter that I've had throughout my entire public shaming incident. Just insane, right? Like the relationship just has been changing, but that's because I did so much inner work. And one of the things that I've had to learn was to say, this is how I want to be treated. This is how I want you to see me. So if I was told certain things about myself and those things were not true, and I could see that I was being scapegoated, I'd very calmly say, is that true? Right? And I think it's hard to remain calm in those situations because you're triggered. So this is why I say to people, take time out. You don't have to go home every single year, right? Take time out to do your work before you go home and talk to those people. Do your inner work, have the support system. So I had my coaches whenever I went home, all of that. There would be times when I'd have to get in my car, drive, and then contact one of my coaches and be like, can we please have a conversation? So I've often had my coaches, and when I would go home, I would have my coaches like schedule 2 sessions a week, because I was like, I know I'm going to be triggered, so we need to work on those things. So, but one of the boundaries that I would set was how I was referred to, how people spoke to me, and at times even when I chose to engage in conversations with people. So I'd be like, this is highly triggering for me. If I have this conversation with you, I'm going to shout and scream, so I'm going to leave now. And sometimes I would even leave my mother's house for like a month and then come back and tell her and say, please don't call me in this time period that I'm gone. I will come back and we will have this discussion, right? So I had to set boundaries and really learn how to talk to people. I mean, for some people, the boundary may be that you need to leave the space because it's so physically violent, right? And I chose to keep communicating with people because I was like, yes, it's mentally and verbally violent, but I was like, I really, really want to work through this because it's so deep, right? But that was my choice. But everyone has different ways of setting boundaries. And I was just like, I want to have relationships with people, but it doesn't mean that having a relationship should destroy me and kill me, right? If I find, and this goes for everything in my life, right? For me, if I find that something is too violent and I don't feel safe, that's when my boundary is like, it's been great, but let us not have a conversation. So I've done that over time with friends and family, right? Where I'm like, I get it, I respect you, but this is really, really not physically safe for me to be in this environment and for us to keep connecting. So I'm going to set that boundary, right? And then the other thing is I got therapy. And I do recommend it, right? For me, I got therapy in my teens. As an adult, I chose to get coaching. But I think maybe getting therapy first and then going to coaching was helpful. I got therapy when I was really young. I enrolled myself into therapy at the age of 15. I spoke to my school, let them know what was happening at home, and they called the school psychologist, and she came through, she listened, and from then on it was determined that I would drop a French as a subject. I wouldn't do French. Everyone at school, all my classmates at that time, were doing a third language, so either French or Latin. And I got to not do a third language. And when everyone was in class doing French or Latin or whatever, their third language, I was getting therapy. And that was awesome because I got therapy twice a week. And that was from a very young age. And I had therapy throughout high school. And what therapy did was it helped me understand the dynamics of some things that were happening. Because I think as a teen, I was already extremely depressed and suicidal. And I think without therapy and without having that understanding and having some coping tools, it wouldn't have worked for me. Why I chose coaching as an adult was because I had the tools of therapy, but I was very, very cognizant of the coaches that I chose. And I'm still very cognizant of the coaches that I choose, right? Is that I love coaching with coaches that have a trauma background and really understand trauma. But also more than anything for me, why I chose coaches now is that a lot of the work that I'm doing around trauma is around money. Like I'm trying, yes, it's about emotional well-being and coaching will get me there, but I also have an end goal. Like I want to increase my income. I want to change my family money story. I want to just have passive income, all of those things. But that doesn't mean that if I felt that I still don't see the value of therapy, right? Because I did start out with therapy as a child. So I found that like this was so powerful. And now that I do the work around trauma, I can work with my coaches and come back into my work, do the meditations, have my realizations, contact my coaches. I sign up for masterminds. I do group coaching. So I have people that can reflect me and can reflect my journey back to me. I feel like that is what I need at the moment. But again, these are all personal things, and I don't think it's either or. I do believe you can get both therapy and coaching. Right? I would highly recommend that, in fact, like therapy really helped me a lot. I'm not going to sit here and be like, it didn't. Like, honestly, the reason why I'm here is because I had awesome resources in my teens. Because can you imagine going through all the crazy as a teenager, not having the resources? So yeah, that's really powerful. And what I want to say to this, right, is that if you're a parent and you have seen yourself scapegoating your child, firstly, get the work that you need to get the help that you need to get to change this, right? And then make sure that your child gets the resources, either gets teen coaching, Nomveliso is great for that, or gets therapy, right? But do your work, because what I saw as a teen is I would go to therapy, but I would come right back into the same environment. So I was doing my healing, but the adults around me were not doing any freaking healing. They were getting worse. And I want to say thank God for my maternal grandmother and my sister, because they did not get into that scapegoating, right? And I know often with siblings, a lot of siblings get sucked into this, right? And then they all also start scapegoating the other sibling because that's what they learned. But my grandmother and my maternal grandmother and my sister refused to do any of that. And they would try to stop it and they would highlight that it was wrong. So I at least had mirrors that were showing me that this is wrong. This is craziness, right? So if you are a parent and your child only sees you and deals with you and you are constantly scapegoating that child, understand how you are impacting their self-esteem, their not good enough wound, and also impacting at a later date their financials, their money story. So what I see with a lot of people is that they go, especially in South Africa is that parents will be like, the child is getting a great education, I'm giving them everything that money can buy, but they're not aware of the emotional damage of what's happening. And then they wonder why the child is an adult and they're not a functional adult, you know? And then the other thing is to practice self-compassion. So for the longest while, for me, it felt like I had missed the memo on adulting, right? Because things that were just normal for other people just felt really difficult for me, because I didn't know that being criticized, really, that like being criticized and being blamed for things that I didn't know as a child was actually the adults around me setting me up for failure. So instead of the adults around me showing me the path and helping me do better, they would shame me, criticize me, and make me feel like a failure. They would have these impossible standards for me. And it would make me feel like I was failing at things. So I was really, really bewildered as an adult, because I felt like maybe everything that they had said about me was right, but it actually wasn't, right? It's just nobody had taught me. So how was I going to know any of the things about life, right? And of course, I wasn't going to be as courageous and as brave as my counterparts that had not experienced the trauma of being scapegoated, right? So I had to learn to practice self-compassion with myself. And this was really, really important. So if you feel like, wow, I'm falling behind, things are not working out for me, what's wrong with me? Just be compassionate with yourself if you've been scapegoated. And then just practice self-care, right? This comes into self-compassion. And I kind of love marrying self-care with pleasure. Often as someone who was scapegoated in the family, you are more shown the terrible things about yourself and the things that were wrong with you, as opposed to the things that were right with you, and praised and celebrated. So start getting into the mode of celebrating yourself, really seeing yourself and rewarding yourself, because if you're a scapegoat in the family, you probably weren't rewarded, so to speak. You were more punished, right? I was looking for the word, so I just delayed. Yeah, you were more punished for existing instead of rewarded for existing. So now start really focusing not just on self-care, but pleasure. And please understand that self-care is not just the bubble baths, it's not the massages. For me, I realized from a very early age, especially when I started doing this healing work, that self-care is doing the uncomfortable inner work so that I don't continue the cycle of scapegoating, so that I can show up in my business, right? So that I can trust people, so that I can just do business with other people, right? So I can have better romantic relationships. Just changing that cycle for myself, because I was like, I want to be a person that has friends. But for that to happen, sorry if you're seeing the lighting again, this is just me as usual playing around with the lighting. So I can have good friendships, so that I can be surrounded by people that I love, right? And that who love me as well and show me love. So that required me to do the work so that I could be visible, so that I could be vulnerable. I wanted to write, and I needed to open up to criticism as a writer. I needed to open up to publishers having not nice things to say about me, right? And that meant I had to do my own inner work around that. So yeah, I hope that helps a lot, guys, with how you can focus on how you can heal yourself as you work on self-care, right? I mean, as you work on healing this trauma of being scapegoated. And also just invest your time in personal growth and in personal development, just become aware and cultivate your strengths to boost your self-esteem. Remember, scapegoating takes away a lot of your sense of self and your self-esteem. So for me, that's one of the things that I really focused on, was how to become a woman of unlimited self-esteem. And it's still a journey that I'm on, right? And really working with my inner child. So how I've been working even deeper beyond what I've spoken about, right, with this trauma of being scapegoated and the not good enough wound, is obviously through the money magic meditations in the money magic course, right? So for me, I recorded, this is how this course has come about, by the way. A lot of the course focuses on the mother wound, family dynamics, the trauma, ancestral trauma, intergenerational trauma. It's not just about the money, right? I always say this, that it's not about the money. And I hope that from today's podcast, you start to understand why I say this, right? Because it's all these other things that we're not even aware of that impact our financial behavior. So for me, that was one of the biggest things, was that I started working on my not good enough wound. I started really developing these meditations, various meditations around the not good enough wound. Fear, the Money Magic course has an entire lesson on the fear of criticism, the fear of rejection. I've got breathwork meditations that touch on that. I've got so much ancestral work around all of this. And of course, I also have the God wound meditations. One of the things that I didn't get to talk about in depth in this podcast episode, because wow, it's so layered, is the God wound, is how when you go through this event, it can literally divorce you from seeing yourself as divinity, right? Because the people around you kind of fracture your soul so that you no longer see yourself as divinity and as part of the divine, and it impacts the way you show up in the world. So if you've been listening to this podcast episode, or you've been watching the YouTube video, I want to invite you to the Mastermind. If you're like, wow, this is incredible, like, how do I start to heal this? Well, firstly, there is the Money Magic course. You can just shoot me an email or DM me at, if you are on Instagram, go to Vangile Makwakwa on Instagram and DM me, or just shoot me an email at vangile@wealthy-money.com. All this information will be in the description, right? But for today, I want to talk about the Wealthy Money Mastermind, which is currently open for registration on August 2023, the whole of August 2023. You can register for the Mastermind. I've got 5 spots in the Mastermind, right, available. So the Mastermind starts September 1st, 2023. It's a 6-month group coaching program, right? So if you have been wanting to do deeper work around your personal finances, or actually in particular your income, the focus of the Mastermind is to help you increase your income and to get you into a position where your income increases to 100,000 Rand a month, or from $5,000 to $8,000 a month in income growth, right? So that you can scale your income. So if you've been finding yourself stuck and you're not able to grow your income, especially in your business, so this is for those people who have a side hustle, a side business, or who have who already have a full-time business, but they're struggling to grow their income. This Mastermind is for you. If you're trying to figure out your income blocks and you're like, I've been doing all of the things and I have no clue what is happening, trust me, the Mastermind is incredible. So what makes the Mastermind so incredible is obviously we do the depth of this work, as I've been talking about, depth of family trauma and the trauma that we're holding on to, especially around money and how it impacts us when it comes to money. But we also do a lot of the practical work, right, around really getting clear on your business, your strategy, your marketing, your messaging, sales, right? So a huge part of the focus is on sales and branding. How do you sell your business? How do you grow? How do you sell your products and services in your business? How do you grow your business? And the beauty of it is you're not doing it alone. You have a group of people. You're in a community with like-minded individuals, with like-minded entrepreneurs, right? So how it works is that we meet up on the first Sunday of every month for 7 hours. I have guest coaches that will be coming in. We call it the virtual retreat, right? I've been doing this mastermind. I've run it for 2 years. It is incredible. Every year I used to run it for a year. This year I'm running it for 6 months, mainly because I noticed that people get people start to have breakthroughs by the 6th month. So it feels like, oh, well, I would rather have people break through and decide if they want to stay on in the mastermind, or else like get a new cohort of people, because people start to reach their financial goals. Yes, it happens, but a lot of that is coming because we're using the energy of the collective, right? And everybody's focused on income growth. They have their income goals. They know what it is that they want and how, and then they start working on that. So on Sundays, I'm having a womb coach come in who's going to do womb work with us as we look at our bank accounts every single Sunday, once a month. And we're going to do weekly goal tracking. We're going to do the weekly goal tracking worksheet and also look at our daily income every single day for the month. And then we're also going to have a marketing and or branding coach coming in to help us really understand our marketing strategy and refine it. And then on the second and third Mondays of the month, we work on what we have learned on Sunday, but we go deeper even on the trauma work and on the practical work in our business. So, and we also have a WhatsApp group. So this WhatsApp group is available to you 24/7. You can post when you want. You get feedback from me on a daily basis when you post. If you have any questions, people will post anything. Hey, what do you guys think about this Instagram post? What do you think about this? I just launched the website. Give feedback, all that. So it's a very, very incredible opportunity. I have seen this current cohort of masterminders. We ended on July 31st, 2023. I've seen people, one of the clients paid off 400,000 Rand or $21,500 in debt in the last, since she's been in the mastermind, started her podcast, launched her business, right? Another one, a 10x to income. Another one launched a yoga mat bag company where she produces bags for our yoga mats. People have launched their Airbnb businesses. It's just incredible, right? It's amazing the things that can happen. So how do you think your life would change? Imagine just focusing on your income goals and working through some of the things that you probably don't even know are a problem and are holding you back in your business. So you've heard me talk about how when I work with my coaches, I'm able to make decisions faster. It's not about making the right decision, but it's about making decisions faster, failing faster, and then continuing to make decisions so that I can keep going in my business. This is the same. So we start September 1st. I currently have 5 spots, and the mastermind is $5,000 upfront if you pay in full for the full 6 months. Or you can pay $1,000 a month for 6 months, right? So there is a monthly payment plan. And again, only work with 5 people. If you do want individual coaching, I do have 1 coaching spot available. And as part of the individual coaching, you do get access to the mastermind as well. So if you're interested in learning more about working with me one-on-one and you're like, not sure, I just want to do a group thing, you get access to the 7-hour virtual retreat on the first Sunday of every month. within the mastermind. So hit me up if you want one-on-one coaching, right? And the link to join the mastermind is also here in the description. So just look through the description. Otherwise, go to wealthy-money.com/mastermind. Again, wealthy-money.com/mastermind. Whew, guys, thank you so much for watching and listening. So, wow, this has been I really went in depth on this topic, and this is one of the things that I want to do. I want to explore certain topics around trauma more in depth. And yes, I'm going to make notes so that I can really, really get more thorough into how how different things that happen within our families impact our financial behavior and impact us as people, and how that then shows up. So I really would love to hear your feedback. What do you think of today's episode? What are your aha moments? Please post in the comment section. And obviously, if this was really helpful to you, I would really, really appreciate it if you could share this podcast interview, subscribe to the YouTube channel, share this podcast interview, share this podcast episode, and share it with family, share it with friends. It may help other people. If you think that there are people that could benefit from this and it could spark a conversation within your family or in your friendship group, please share this episode. It's all about when we heal and then sharing the healing resources with others. I promise you there's something incredible as everyone around us also starts going on their healing journey. So I wish you a beautiful day further. Have a fantastic day. Cheerio.